Better than the alternative. All righty.
Very much better.
I am glad we're live. I'm glad everybody's with us online and here in the class today. My name is Norm Ellis. This is Grace Baptist Church, the Adult One Bible Study. Glad you're here to study God's Word today. We're going to be ending up our 2 units we've been doing, 2 units of study on Genesis. So we're in the last chapter of Genesis. We're going to sum stuff up. Everybody?
I don't have, but that's right.
What's up? You don't have a book?
No, these are Acts.
Oh, you got the new one already. You jumped ahead of me.
Oh, there was
You
underneath was
jumped ahead of me. Now these are to hand out later.
okay.
No, hang on to it.
You're fine. You hold on to it.
Oh, we take it home actually? I mean, I thought
At the end of
first one
our session today, I'm going to hand those out.
Okay.
So you're fine. Okay.
It says Grace Baptist Church is live.
All right, I'm glad to hear that. Anyway, getting back to where I was before, my name's Norm Ellis. This is Grace Baptist Church, Adult One Bible Study. Glad you're here with us. Those of you online and in the class, today we're in Genesis chapter 50. We're finishing up our study on Genesis, which has been a 2-unit process. And we took it from creation all the way now to the end of Joseph. So today's is called Revenge. Revenge. And was it a quote from The Wrath of Khan that revenge is best served cold. Of course, he's actually quoting from Shakespeare, I think.
Yes.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But whatever the case, I don't care. It's best not served at all. And we're going to talk about that today. We're in Genesis chapter 50, like I said. We're looking at these 3 points, verses 15 through 18 of that chapter. Message sent, and then truth declared, 19 through 21, and then promises assured, 22 through 26. To give us some context, we'll be reading more than just those verses, obviously. But that's our focal or our main verses. And our main point today is that followers of God faithfully remember His plans and purposes. So, I forgot to highlight the word too. Shame on me. Got to underline revenge. All righty. Hope everybody's had a great week. Glad to see everybody here. Let's go ahead and open with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for all you've done for us today. And Lord, just pray that you be with us as we study your word. Be with those that are sick in our group, Lord. Be with those who can't make it here. Those that are on their way here, be with them. Keep them safe as they come. And just pray that you'd open our hearts and minds to your principles of truth that are being taught in these scriptures, Lord. Thank you so much. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
So, get us thinking here a little bit about what our lesson's going to be talking about. I put some words up on the marker board right here. And for those of you at home that cannot quite read it, I'll read it for you. One is mailed birthday card. Another one is tweet, or X, I guess they call them now. Messages on the instant messaging of that is now called X. There's also voicemail, and there's also email. So what do you think all these words have in common?
Communication.
Okay, that's true. Let's narrow it down. What kind of communication? Personal, okay. Sort of. This will help you, when I say sort of, this will help you maybe see what I'm trying to get to here.
Hopefully friendly.
Friendly, yeah. Okay, I'll give you a hint. It has to do with this. No.
Speaking.
My
face.
Oh.
Is it face to face?
No.
It isn't.
No, it is not face to face, is it? You know, it's kind of impersonal. Now, I know you said personal, and it can be. A birthday card is a kind of nice thing to get. I like to get them. We don't get them anymore nowadays.
Yeah.
Did you notice that?
Yes.
People don't send birthday cards. They'll send you a Facebook card or something like that. And I get that, I guess.
There's
Cards
even
are
emailed
so
ones.
expensive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, but they're all messages that are sent without seeing a person face to face. So what do you think about those kind of messages? Do you like those kind of messages? Maybe you do, maybe you don't.
That's better face to face. And it's better to hear a voice than to send an email or a text.
Yeah.
I don't like text.
Now in the business world, I will say, because I dealt with this a lot when I was a supervisor at the civil service, the that I worked at, both for the Air Force and for the state prison system in Washington, that emails are really good because they're in black and white and
Yes.
people can't quibble.
Yeah, yes.
No, I didn't say you could do that. I said you can't do that. Here's my email to refresh your memory.
Yeah.
Because I kept.
But you can't argue with it.
No, you can't. And I kept everything, like I said. But anyway, it is kind of impersonal. It's not the same as face to face, right? But this kind of message plays an important role in the beginning of our study today. We've been, like I said, we've been in this study for a while now. We've been in for 2 units. And we have the map here that shows the travels of Jacob, right? And Jacob's kind of a key person here. Jacob, also known as, for 50 points extra, Israel. There we go, Israel. So he, this green line represents all the different places he went to and stuff like that. And he did his last journey, in a sense, in today's thing. Actually, we're not going to see the finish, but see this green line coming down here? Where do you think that green line's going down to?
Egypt.
Egypt, right? Because there was
The family.
famine in the land, right? People were starving. So Joseph's brothers showed up and said to this ruler in Egypt, "We're starving. Can we please have some food?" You know? And the ruler looks down at them, saying, "I know these guys. Right? I know these guys. Those are my brothers who sold me into slavery."
Put me in the pit.
And he had a little fun with them. Let's admit it was a little bit of fun. But it was also some testing to see if his brothers had changed at all. But anyway, after he revealed himself and they had a reunion of sorts, they were still kind of worried about this guy who's an all-powerful person in the world now, basically, short of Pharaoh himself, has total control over their destiny, right? And so he says, "Bring the family on down," because this 5 more years of famine. Okay, so this is what this line here is indicating. Jacob, with all the family, is coming down to Egypt to sojourn in Egypt, and that's what that line indicates. Now, as we know, there's going to be another line. It's the body of Israel, and we're going to talk about that. And it actually comes back up here, and the traditional burial site for Rachel, I think, is where he ends up there, because there's some land that he bought for that purposes. I guess Abraham actually bought it, and it was basically used for the patriarchs and their family at that time. So anyway, let's just give a little thumbnail on that. I hope that helps a little bit to understand the context here. Jacob's final journey was to Egypt to be reunited with his son Joseph, and the son that he thought he'd lost. He thought that an animal had ate him up, and his sons told him, "Yeah, this is what's left of him. Yeah, he's gone. He's gone." And so the favorite son was dead. You think that was devastating to Jacob?
Yeah.
It was very devastating.
That'd be that must have been hard for him to forgive his older sons too,
Well,
but he did.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little more about that aspect. That's exactly right.
Because he passed over them.
Yep. When Jacob, also known as Israel, later died, Joseph and his brothers took him and buried him back in Canaan. That was his wishes, to be buried back in Canaan. We also have some other things we've been looking at, the patriarchs, which talks a little bit about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and also Joseph. Joseph is considered a patriarch of sorts. Even though he's one of the sons of Jacob, he was instrumental in the survival of the family, right? And so we see that also. And there's we've been talking about the key moments of Jacob's life. And the last part here is Jacob moved with his family to Egypt, and we saw that in chapter 46, right? And now Jacob dies in Egypt, was buried in Canaan, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today, and the fallout from that. So making plans and following schedules are part of everyday life for us, right? Some people are locked into their plans and become distressed when those plans don't work out as they hoped or expected. Others can just roll with the flow. I wish I was like that. The Bible reveals that God, though, He has plans and purposes for all things. Therefore, we need to trust His plans and purposes. In these verses today we're going to look at indicate that Joseph finished life well because he trusted God's plans for him and his people. And that's the introductory paragraph, if you would look on the book, page 118. but ask the question, how does remembering that God has a plan and a purpose for you, how does that change the way we approach life? Or should it change the way we approach life?
Well,
It should, right?
Yeah, we know that he has something good planned for us.
Right.
You know, man.
Look at the things that Joseph went through.
Mm-hmm.
If he didn't believe that God had a plan, could he have been discouraged?
Oh,
And if he'd heard about this dream that the baker and the butler had, he probably said,
Yeah, whatever.
whatever. He
Yeah.
was not.
Yeah.
He was not. He looked. He knew God had him in his hand.
Yeah.
He knew he had a purpose. He knew that God had something better for him, and he knew it at an early age. Remember, he had those dreams from God.
Yeah.
What was the dreams that seemed to cause the most problem?
bowing down.
The-
Brothers
yeah,
will bow down.
The sheaves
Yes.
that all bow down to him.
She usually do it.
And also the stars, the 11 stars, or 10 stars, and the sun and the moon. And what did they do to him? They bowed down to him. And Jacob didn't like that either. His father said, your mother and your father are going to do what to you?
Yeah.
So it wasn't just the brothers, it was as well. But this is something we got to realize. God has a purpose and a plan for us. Okay? We're not just random pieces of atomic material just floating willy-nilly. We are in a purposeful way. God's using us. And that's kind of exciting to think about that. But anyway, one of the things that sort of follow from this introductory paragraph is, how would you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being a hardcore planner, or a number 5, just going to go with the flow? What would you rate yourself as there?
I'm kind of in between.
Sort of, you're
I'm in between.
a solid 3,
Yes.
right in the middle of that squishy middle there. Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
3 and 3.
I-
I'm not. I'm a planner. I admit it. Here I am. I plan things. I'm either a 1 or a 2. How about you, Steve? You want to take a commitment there? Are you a planner, or are you a go with the flow kind of guy?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
There you go.
That's a,
Some things I plan, some things I go with the flow, but I keep an eye on it,
Yeah.
so I can step off anytime I need to.
Okay.
yeah,
I get
that's
it.
a
I
good
get that.
way. Yeah.
We need to, though, remember that God does have a plan, and we're part of it, right?
Yeah.
And that's exciting, like I said before. So,
And rather than think of the cup as half empty, you think of it as half full.
there you go.
You know, it's more, you should.
I'm sorry,
I've
I'm a little more pragmatic than that. It's full all the time.
Yeah, there you go.
All right.
I always say, I'm just thankful I have a cup.
Yeah, that's
Right.
good.
Thank you for this cup, Laura. Who would
Yes.
like to do a scripture for me? I have scriptures. You want a long one or a short or
I'll
medium?
take this because I got to leave early.
I'll take
All right. You got the first one then, huh? What do you want?
I don't care.
You pick one. Would you like one too? No? If you don't want to, that's fine. Nobody has to read. I'm going to give you 2.
We have to read.
Look at you.
There.
Because they're
you
short,
didn't want to
And
read.
they're short and they relate to each
4 and
other.
5, end of the class, I'll be out of here before I.
He thinks. Right. Well, anyway,
Let's start.
so we need to remember that God has that plan for us, right? So, just sort of a background here before we start is we finished in chapter 46 last week, right? So, if there is a thing that I included in our handouts today. It's, which handout number was that now? I think it's number 2. You said 2, didn't you?
Yeah.
You were right. You were very clairvoyant there. Understanding the context here. And this is really good because it gives us a background of what 47 through 50 is going to be all about. And I did do some highlighting and underlining compared to the part because this is also occurs, I think, in your textbook. But with the arrival of Joseph's family in Egypt, Pharaoh assigned them the land of Goshen. Now, what was the land of Goshen? Just some little lots over there somewhere, or some?
No, it was the best.
It was the cream of the crop. It was the best place to be. Why do you think Pharaoh did that?
Was it because of Joseph interpreted the dream that he had and didn't have to tell him what it was?
Pharaoh owed Joseph everything, and he knew it. He knew it. He knew that Joseph knew what God was saying, and no one else did. No one else did. So he knew this. So what else would you do to somebody who saved you from everything? You'd give them whatever they wanted. you'd give them the best, right? So anyway, the famine continued, and this is interesting. I'd forgotten that this had happened, but basically everyone became indentured servants to Pharaoh at the end of this. They didn't just give the stuff away. Joseph collected silver from the Egyptians in exchange for the grain he had stored as a famine went along, and he provided food in return for their livestock. So he got silver and he got their livestock. Finally, the people offered to sell their land, and they lost their land as well to Pharaoh, and then themselves as slaves to Pharaoh in order to survive. Joseph established a law that a fifth of the produce from the land belonged to Pharaoh. He permitted the people to keep the remaining 4/5 as seed and as food for themselves. And that's an interesting thing to hear. Joseph's father Jacob, he lived 17 more years after he went to, I didn't realize it was that long either, by the way. I'd forgotten that as well. 17 more years, and when he moved, the whole family moved to Egypt to survive. 17 more years. Why didn't he go back after the famine was over? You know, that's a question that the lesson does not ask, but I've wondered that myself. That was part of God's plan again. If they had not, would they have become enslaved? Would you have seen the miraculous works that God did through Moses? Would you have seen?
But that was part of the plan.
That was all part of the plan. Yeah. Would you have seen the fact that a whole generation had to die in the wilderness because they were disobedient and not going into the promised land? Would you have seen the 10 Commandments being given? None of this, all that would have been missed. You would never have had Moses. Think about the impact that made. So this is all part of God's plan. Imagine that, huh? Go figure. God's got a wonderful plan, and even for why did he pick this tribe of Hebrews to be those people? They were pretty spectacular people, great physiques, wonderful, smart people, very moral people, outstanding people.
They love God.
They love God.
Well, Abraham's
but the thing to remember is that's not why God chose them.
They were nothing.
God chose them because he wanted to.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
he wanted to. Not all of the Hebrews lived a godly life. We know that. A lot of them were rebellious. But anyway, I've gone aside a little bit here. But he died finally. Jacob did, Israel, also known as Israel, at age 147. And he requested that Joseph make sure he gets buried with his ancestors in Canaan, right? The same place where Rachel was buried. The same place where I think Abraham and Isaac were buried, if I remember right. Prior to his death, Jacob also blessed Joseph's 2 sons. Now, Joseph had 2 sons by an Egyptian wife. It was Manasseh and Ephraim, but you never hear it that way. It's always Ephraim and Manasseh, which is interesting because Manasseh is the oldest. Ephraim is the second born. But when they were given the patriarchal blessing by Jacob before he died, he took his hands and went, because he wanted Ephraim to get the first blessing. This is interesting because God had revealed to him that was what he was to do. Although Manasseh had been born first, Jacob deliberately bestowed the blessing on the firstborn on Ephraim. Jacob also told Joseph that one day God would bring his family back to Canaan. We're looking at handout number 2 right now, in case you're wondering. It's part of the lesson as well. Genesis 49 records Jacob's final blessings on his 12 sons. He got them all together, and he gave them that final blessing because he knew he was going to be dying soon. He based most of these prophecies on the characteristics of each son's behavior, the various blessings. The one on Judah is perhaps the most significant. Judah is portrayed as a young lion. Now, a lion is a symbol of royalty. So he's letting him know that you are the one that the kings should come through. And the king of all kings, by the way, also. Anyway, symbolizing sovereignty, strength, and courage. Although Judah had sinned, he had repented and demonstrated leadership later. His tribe was declared the royal tribe through whom King David and the Messiah would come. When Jacob died, he was embalmed. This is interesting. He's a Hebrew, yet he went through an embalming. Hebrews didn't do embalming. Yeah. According to Egyptian custom. Why do you think that was?
And to travel to Canaan.
Well, that's true. As part of it, I'm sure. But another thing was, remember, Pharaoh loved Joseph, loved his family. He wanted the best for them, so he would do whatever he could to do the best for them. One of the things they would do is they would treat the dead with great respect. And they go through this whole process to make sure they were preserved. And it was part of probably maybe ancestor worship or something, I don't know. But that's not the way the Hebrews did it. But that's the way they did it for him. And as it turned out, it probably was the best thing, because later they took him back to his body, back to Canaan, right? Anyway, buried in the ancestral tomb at, oh boy, Machpelah. That was as close as I'm going to get. Yeah, we see that in Genesis 49. Abraham had purchased the burial site located near Hebron, from Ephron the Hittite. With the death of their father, Joseph's brothers began to fear that Joseph would seek revenge. I don't know why they would think that. For the way that they had treated him, Joseph wept when he learned of their fears. Now, why did he weep? He might have wept because of their failure to understand his forgiveness, or because he realized he should have assured them long before their father's death. In any case, Joseph reminded them of his earlier words when he had first revealed his identity. Joseph held the deep conviction that although the brothers had plotted evil, God had orchestrated events to bring about the survival of his people. So before he died, Joseph expressed confident faith that God would eventually come to his people's aid in Egypt and lead them back to Canaan. He insisted they swear that when this happened, they would carry his bones back to the promised land for burial. Thus, Joseph's coffin in Egypt served as a visible reminder to Jacob's descendants that one day God would bring them back home. Hebrews 11:22 talks about that. We'll talk about that later. And so as we read these verses, look for ways that remembering God's plans and purposes impacted how Joseph thought and lived. And this is something I hadn't really thought about a lot before. But Joseph's body stayed in Egypt. Jacob's body they took back to Canaan. I mean, it was a big deal. They could have did the same thing with Joseph, but no, it stayed there. Why do you think that was the case?
I think that Pharaoh was still part of Pharaoh's command, I think. I don't know.
I think you're right, yeah. It was all part of the fact that Pharaoh loved Joseph and revered him, essentially. But it also served God's purpose. Because what happened? Israel, the people of Israel became enslaved when a Pharaoh arose that did not know Joseph. And yet here in the land of Goshen, probably, we don't know for where it was, there was probably some sort of a building, we call them a mausoleum, and inside that was what? Joseph, his embalmed body, ready to do what? To go back with them to the promised land.
You know what I'm...
And it was like a reminder for them.
It was a memorial sign.
Memorial.
Yeah.
And it was a memorial. They remembered, oh, that's what's going to happen to us. We're going to go back. You were going to say something, David?
Well, I was wondering, even though the Pharaoh arose and didn't know Joseph, I'm sure there was documentation of Joseph, that he could have read and...
The history
Yeah.
was so essential that everybody knew.
They all knew.
They all passed
But
it
if it
down.
was a new family, some of the ancient empires, they would purge as much
Yeah.
as they could
Oh,
from the
yeah.
previous families,
True.
Yeah.
because they didn't want any allegiance to those previous dynasties.
Right.
So
Okay.
there's
Yes.
a bit of a danger of that.
And as much as that Pharaoh loved him, they were still Hebrews. They were not Egyptians. So later on, somebody arose who didn't care about the fact that Joseph had saved them and all this stuff.
Yeah, that's
These
it.
people aren't Egyptians. Why are we tolerating them? Look at how big they're growing
And they made
as a group.
Second-class workers.
We're getting kind of scared because they're getting more numerous than we are.
and they maintained a unique identity, which was something
Yes.
that was essential
Yes.
for them, and they thankfully kept to that. I mean, not perfect, obviously. They struggled still, but the unique identity that they maintained was something that allowed them to, I guess, be targeted.
Mhm.
It's not too different from Christians, right? If we maintain a unique identity as God's people, we might be targeted. That's okay. Jesus said, expect that. Genesis 50, verse 25 is where Joseph says, God will surely take care of you, and you shall carry my bones up
Right.
from here.
That's part of our focal verses today.
Yeah, it's great. Again, it's that word of encouragement of my bones are memorial
Mhm.
to remind
That's
you that
right.
God is not done with you. He will take you to the next
And
place.
I think that was really important. When you see that visual, you remember it.
Yeah.
And they all remembered it. That we're going to go back to the promised land, and we're going to take Joseph back with us.
It's like memorial stones they begin to set up in the promised land.
Yes. Anyway, so let's pick it up here. I was going to read the first part of chapter 50 that they don't have us read because it's kind of important too. It says when Jacob died after blessing Ephraim and Manasseh, right? And I think the 12. No, I'm thinking of, the 12,
Jacob
the
blessed
other ones.
them all,
Yeah. Anyway, but he died, and so Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. Joseph commanded his servants and his physicians to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. Now 40 days were required for it, for such is the period required for embalming. And the Egyptians wept for him 70 days.
Wow.
Think about that. 70 days the Egyptians wept because he had saved them. I mean, well, not he. His father had saved him. And they're going to weep for Joseph, obviously, when he died as well. But anyway, when the days of mourning for him were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, if now you have found favor in your sight, please speak to Pharaoh, saying, my father made me swear, saying, behold, I am about to die, and my grave, which I dug for myself, is in the land of Canaan. There you shall bury me. Now therefore, please let me go up and bury my father. Then I will return. So remember, he's in servitude is the wrong word, in service to the Pharaoh. So he is part of that inner court. It's important for him to remain there, to be part of that government, right? So that's why he's telling him that. Pharaoh's concerned if he were to leave. Pharaoh said, go up and bury your father as he made you swear. So Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his household, and the elders of the land of Egypt, and all the households of Joseph and his brothers and his father's household. They left only their little ones and their flocks behind and their herds in the land of Goshen. Can you imagine that? And all the support for that, to move that many people that distance. There also went with him both chariots and horsemen. There was a very great company. And when they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, they lamented there with a great, very great and sorrowful lamentation. And he observed 7 days of mourning for his father. Now when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning at the threshing floor of Atad, they said, this is a grievous mourning for the Egyptians. Therefore it is named Abel Mizraim, which is beyond the Jordan. Anyway, it made an impression not just on the family, not just on the Egyptians, but even on
The outsiders.
outsiders, the
Those
Canaanites and all the people in the area. Can you imagine that? It's not missed by them.
And interestingly, the promise to Abraham, Genesis 12, verse 3, you all the nations will be blessed. We see a small fulfillment here through Joseph, right? And then you see Jacob, when he's actually brought in, he blesses Pharaoh, it says twice in chapter 47.
Yeah.
So Pharaoh is being blessed by Jacob,
Yep.
by Israel,
Yep.
and then Israel as a whole is blessing all the nations of that region by survival. But anyway, just interesting. Again, we see this whole fulfillment from 3 generations prior, and the ultimate fulfillment in Christ.
There's all
And partial
kinds of
fulfillment.
great things like that, and parallels we see here.
Yeah, yeah.
What I found interesting is back all the way up is that when Joseph's father died and had him embalmed, he used physicians that were in Joseph's service, which meant he used Egyptian physicians to embalm his dad instead of using.
Well, I don't think it could have been ancestor worship or that.
Well, no, I don't. I
Because
mean, the
Joseph went
Egyptians themselves may have had some of that as well. Is all I'm
Yeah.
saying.
They're
Because they
just-
believed in a very different idea of the afterlife and preparing
Yes,
people
yeah,
for it and
they-
stuff like that.
yeah.
But they were up there showing their respect to
Yes,
David, or
yes.
David, Joshua, Jacob,
Jacob.
Jacob.
yeah,
That guy.
The father.
the other guy. Basically because of what Jacob had done for the whole country of Egypt.
You mean Joseph? Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What Joseph had done.
Well,
Yeah, Joseph.
Pharaoh looked upon Joseph's father Jacob as probably a grandfather to him or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, somebody, or father to him, excuse me. There was somebody who should be honored immensely because he is the father of Joseph who saved us. You know,
Yeah,
that
there's
kind
a
of
lot
thing.
of respect.
Oh,
for
a
that
lot,
family.
yes. Anyway, so thus his sons did for him as he had charged him, for his sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in a cave, right? And it says that, which Abraham had bought the burial site from Ephraim the Hittite. And after he buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers, and all that had gone up to bury his father. So there we are. We're at this point here. The father is dead. Now, just before we start this next part here, I want you to remember something. Remember Jacob's brother. What was his name? Esau. remember what Jacob did to Esau. He stole the birthright. He stole the blessing. He stole everything that Esau, as the firstborn, should have had.
Yeah.
Jacob took them. And what happened because of that? Esau felt what towards Jacob?
Animosity.
Animosity. Matter of fact, he said something that's well known around in that area. He said, as soon as Isaac dies, so does Jacob.
Oh,
That's basically what he said. Now that's my transliteration. He said, I'm going to wait until the father's dead. Then I'm going to get my vengeance. Okay, so this is not wasted on Joseph's brothers. They know what happened. They know exactly what happened. So keep that in mind.
but Esau gave it away.
Huh?
Esau gave it away.
He was tricked into giving.
Well, that doesn't
Yeah,
make a
he
difference.
was tricked.
He was still
Yeah.
tricked, but I'm
Yeah,
saying this,
but-
he was going to exact his revenge
Yeah,
when?
Yeah,
When his dad died.
yeah.
Then there's nothing stopping him.
He
He's
didn't
going to
want
do
to
it.
grieve his parents.
Yeah, he gave the birthright away for a bowl of lentil
A
stew.
stew,
Dude,
yeah,
yeah.
But the trickery came
Yeah.
when
yeah,
the mother.
later.
I know.
Yes, the mother was
That was where
involved
the
and
trickery
had
was
the-
at.
the,
Because if
He
he hadn't
mentioned
done
the
that,
mother.
Esau could have came in and said, nah, I didn't do anything like that.
Yeah, there was always that way, but we all know they were.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, let's go on. Let's go on to the first part here. First part is Genesis chapter 50. We're in chapter 50, verses 15 through 18. So we're going to look at these verses. And the first 4 verses, I want you to listen for the brothers' actions and Joseph's response. Who has number 1?
Me.
Oh, you got number 1.
Then Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead. They said, what if Joseph bear a grudge against us and pays us back in full for all the wrong which we did him? So they sent a message to Joseph saying, your father charged before he died, saying, thus said you shall to Pharaoh, please forgive, I beg you, the transgressions of your brothers and their sin, for they did you wrong. And now please forgive the transgressions of the servants of the God of your father. And Joseph wept when they spake to him. Then his brothers also came and fell down before him, saying, behold, we are your servants.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
And how dreams come.
Yes,
That
it
happens.
is. So, what was the brothers' actions? What did they do? I'll give you a little hint here. We talked a little bit about it,
They
right?
didn't send him any birthday cards.
That's for sure.
They didn't call him.
Yeah.
But he
No
sent.
emails.
They sent a message in verse 16.
Yeah.
They didn't say, "Hey, brother, we need to talk to you," and then start.
They started with another lie again.
Well, not necessarily. It's something we don't know because I know what you're getting at because I thought that maybe the same thing here. But it says their father
Yeah,
charged before he died. Now we don't know all the things that he had said to them. Maybe he did say something like that. We don't know.
Well, when they go, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us?
Yes,
Oh
yes.
no.
Oh.
We got to come up with a story.
Well, we don't know that. Is what I'm saying. We don't know. But what interesting is to see here is, like I said, they're remembering Esau's thing against Jacob, their father, right? And I think that's probably what it is. Oh shoot, he's dead. Now what's going to happen to us? Oh, we're doomed. Like Maynard G. Krebs used to say on the Many Loves of what was that called?
Dobie Gillis.
Dobie Gillis, yeah. We're doomed. We're doomed. Before he
Good
became
one.
Gilligan. Anyway, but he said they're either made this up or they're reminding him. One of those two. We don't know about this. So, also, this another thing here is they're finally admitting something here. What are they admitting?
Well, their guilt.
That's right. They said we did this bad thing. They never really said that before. They basically were astounded. Their jaws dropped when they realized Joseph was still alive and now he was in charge of them.
Interestingly, they put it in the words of their father. They didn't say, I
Yes.
did you wrong. They said, our father said that we did you great injustice.
and well, that's true too, but they still admit it. And the
There's some ownership here.
And the interesting thing is, who did Jacob love greatly? Besides Benjamin, we knew that too. Joseph. We know that. So they're throwing it back in that way. No doubts about that. You're right about that. If the father who loved you so much said this and you loved him, what should you do then?
They were
Joseph.
worried about their own skins.
Well, we know that. That's for sure. You're right. But it does say something here. Thus you shall say to Joseph. In other words, he's supposedly charging them to say, please forgive the transgressions of your fathers and the sin, for they did you wrong. So, and then it says, and that's the quote. They're quoting him supposedly. And so now the brothers are saying, please forgive the transgressions of the servants of the God of your father. So it's interesting how they're putting it. You're right. Exactly right. And they're doing it in that way on purpose, aren't they?
Yeah. It seems like they were still afraid to approach Joseph, so they sent a message.
Yeah.
Their
what-
dad didn't want us to be killed.
Yeah.
We serve the same God you
Uh-huh.
serve.
Yep.
They're definitely afraid.
Somebody said this already, they want to save their skin. They know that they're next, probably. Because with all the terrible things they did.
Do you
And-
think at that point they figured out too what Joseph went through before? I mean,
Yes, I did.
for years he was in Pharaoh's
Mhm.
prison, and I can't remember how many years, but
He was a slave all the way.
yeah, he was
It was
a
a long
slave.
time.
Yeah,
And I think especially when they came to Egypt, because then they were able to see all the things going on and hear all the stuff that happened probably to Joseph. And they realized, oh shoot, he got sold as a slave to this guy Potiphar, who then threw him in jail on a trumped up charge.
yeah.
And then he had to spend even more time in there when the cupbearer didn't do what he was supposed to do. They realized all the suffering that he went through that they caused. But
Not to-
what was Joseph's response? I'm sorry, you were going to say
I was
something.
going to say, not to mention the Ishmaelites that they sold him to.
Yeah.
What they did to him.
Who
Yeah.
knows?
That's,
Who knows what they did? Yeah.
but they weren't nice to him, I can assure that.
Yeah.
So what was Joseph's response? Ah, yes. Dad is dead. I can get them now. No.
No,
He wept. It says he wept, doesn't it? He wept when they spoke to him. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. I guess by means of the letter, but I think after that point they must have met, because it says, then his brothers also came. So Joseph wept when he heard that message, and then his brothers came. Probably summoned them, I guess, and they did what?
Fell down.
Fell down before him and said, "We are your slaves."
That's the prophecy.
Yeah, he could have went, remember those dreams I told you about, guys?
Yep.
But
So
he didn't.
So we see some main points. We kind of talked about them already here. But the main thing is they felt what? For what they did to Joseph?
ashamed.
Ashamed. That's another word for being ashamed. You felt what?
Guilty.
Guilt. I was trying to get the word guilt. And it being ashamed and guilty is very similar. But that's what they felt. They felt this guilt, right? It was consuming them. Have you ever felt guilt in a situation? Maybe you did somebody wrong, or maybe you didn't do something wrong, but they think you did, and you know there's this terrible rift, and you feel what? Anxious, anxieties. You can't sleep. I've been through that. I know.
But they didn't necessarily feel sorry.
No. Well,
No, I mean,
it's hard to say because we don't get all the words here, but I think part of it might have been that. But because see, what did Joseph do? He provided for them.
yeah.
He did all the things he could. He gave them the best land there was. Anything they wanted, they got. It said before this, in the chapters before this. So I think they were just hard to accept it.
Yeah.
I think they're. I mean, if somebody's doing something for you and you don't deserve it, is it easy for you to accept it? Especially if you did the opposite to them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
like
it's
coals of
hard
Yeah,
fire
you're
eating them up.
back of your
Yeah.
mind, you're thinking he's up to something.
You might be thinking that, yeah.
Back of their minds. is-
Yeah.
It could be that aspect of it. It can also just be the fact that you can't change your mind around that because you were the person who did the bad thing. It's sometimes harder to forgive yourselves
Yeah,
than it is to
yeah,
forgive somebody else
yeah.
because the guilt just is consuming you at that point.
Often, this is kind of a general thing as a pastor, I'll notice, when somebody dies in a family, patriarchs and matriarchs, there is usually a lot of drama. And sometimes families will splinter, fall apart, fall into chaos and conflicts. This is very normal humanity. Like I see this even in good Christian families sometimes when, somebody passes away and it's a cause for dissensions.
Yeah.
And so, that's not new to us today in American
Nope,
culture.
not new at all. You're
Right.
right.
So the brothers also just know the general thing. our patriarch is gone. What's going to
We're
happen?
exposed.
We're exposed. Our protection is gone, right? You know, and so there's probably a very legitimate fear that, you know, we might splinter and die, you know. And again, if you think about how the ancient world was, they were brutal. The ancient world in general, it was not uncommon for kings to kill their brothers.
Matter of fact,
you know?
it's routine.
Yeah. And so again, they're looking at the way of the world, and they're afraid that Joseph is going to go the way of the world. They've not taken trust in his words. Yeah, so I can see again, you know, a lot of this. It's interesting also, they do something very similar to what Jacob did when he sought restoration with Esau. He sent messengers ahead of him.
Yes, he did.
He sent messengers ahead, and then he came and he fell down before him.
Yes, he
And
did.
it's the same thing here. They sent messages ahead of them,
Uh-huh.
and then they came and they fell down before him. So very classic style of
It's a good system, personally.
it worked for their dad.
Yeah.
But I think it also does demonstrate, you know, if you will,
Restitution.
yeah, a desire for restitution, but a sorrow of
Yes,
heart.
a broken
And
heart.
it could have just been charades. It could have just been, you know, whatever. But these would be the actions you would show.
I
if
think
you
it was
truly were
preliminary.
brokenhearted.
It was preliminary to their hearts being changed, I think.
Yeah.
Because it's a hard thing to get over.
Yeah.
And you know, let's just admit it. One of the hardest things in the world is to forgive people or to accept forgiveness. I've seen it over and over and over and over. It's a difficult thing because you got those things and you cherish them. They're in your heart. You love them. You protect those little hurts because you know that person needs to pay. Or vice versa. It could be, I did this terrible thing. They can never forgive me. I'm not getting bothered. You know, those kind of things. If you come to that realization, there's some key things in the lesson that the commentary brings out that you don't have in your lesson book. One of them is, in point number 1, we just finished, is the key word. The key word they believe here is forgive. And I think it's very true here. Because Joseph did what? His heart was what? Broken. He forgave them. And we see the evidence of it over and over. It says the Hebrew word has 3 basic categories of meaning. The first category, lift up, occurs both literally and figuratively in the Old Testament. The second category, carry, is used especially for bearing the guilt or punishment for sin. And the third category is take away. I love that. It stresses the pardon or forgiveness of the sin. The latter action of taking away sin appears as one of God's attributes in Exodus 34, and Micah 7 talks about that. God's gracious nature in forgiving sin is graphically pictured in the Day of Atonement. In the Day of Atonement that the Jews would observe. In that ceremony, Aaron placed his hands on the head of a live goat and confessed all of Israel's sins. You'd be there a long time. There must have been some sort of general type things too there. Anyway, this was called a scapegoat. It was symbolically it would carry the people's sins off into the wilderness, because that's what they would do with it.
I think it was interesting.
And Joseph's brothers wanted him to demonstrate that kind of grace towards them. You were going to say.
I find it interesting when his brothers finally came to him. It was right after their father died.
Right.
And Joseph, loving his father very much, is really emotionally distraught over the thing. So here they come. This is a good time to ask for
We better do
forgiveness.
it now. It's our opportunity.
Yeah, before he comes out.
I think there's a lot of that probably going on there.
Yeah, it's. I find the timing really suspect.
Well, I think it's purposeful by God, but yeah, I get what you mean.
It's interesting, you know, you talked about the scapegoat, which we still use
Yes,
today.
that terminology.
And even the one about don't kill the messenger. They
Yeah.
sent messengers, you know?
Yep, that's true.
Oh,
Yeah, don't
Yeah,
shoot
yeah,
my mold
yeah.
piano player.
Yes, well,
Yeah.
that's a little bit different.
Yeah.
Let's go on, because we got to hurry. I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
know, that clock got speeded up on me. The next point is truth declared. Who's got number 2? Number 2, the next 3 verses, note the key words or phrases that may stand out to you in these verses. Go.
But Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid, for I am in God's place. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. So therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide you and your little ones. Provide for you and your little ones." So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them.
Now, this is not the first time Joseph's done this. He did this when he first revealed himself, remember?
He did.
And they still have a hard time with it. Like I said, accepting the fact that you did something bad and somebody's forgiven you, that's a hard thing to do.
I think it's hardest to forgive yourself in
Yes.
some situations.
But I like what he said here at the very beginning in verse 19. It says, do not be afraid. And then he says it's in a question, for am I in God's place? In other words, is it up to me?
Oh, am I in?
Yeah.
I said it the other way.
Am I in God's place to exact some sort of vengeance here?
Oh,
Right? And that's the inference, I think.
yeah.
Does that make sense? No. And so the answer is a rhetorical question, and the answer is no, I'm not, right? So God knows best, is what he's saying here, right? God knows best. So in this part here, we see several interesting words. Anything stand out at you as far as key words or phrases here in these verses?
You meant evil against me,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
God meant good.
Yeah. And also, don't fear. Don't be afraid. Now, it's kind of easy for him to say that. He's the guy in power, but what can you do? You can only reassure and reassure, right? So that's what he's doing. And he's saying that I am following what God said. I am doing what God said. And so I'm going to forgive you, essentially, is what he's saying here.
And he
And-
comforted.
And it's for a reason, a purpose, a plan. We see that if I had not been thrown in that pit and then sold to the Midianites and sold into slavery, I would never have been there for me to be in a place where God wanted me to preserve life. Look at all the people his actions did to save. All those people he saved. Right? All the Egyptians, all the countries surrounding Egypt. They came from a long ways away when they heard there was food in Egypt and there was no food where they were. And they even Canaan, right? They came from Canaan. It says, in which verse was that? God meant it for good to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. So Joseph said, I see God's plan. Do you see God's plan, guys? Do you see it? I don't think they still saw it. I think that's the problem. We don't see God's plan a lot of times, don't we? But Joseph had insight. He saw the plans, didn't he?
And he left it up to his God to deal with his brothers if it wasn't his place to do it.
Right.
And I think he realized that.
Right. It was God's.
Yes.
It says, vengeance is not for you, it's for the Lord. Remember?
Yeah.
Anyway, it says, therefore don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. Think about the care that means. I'm even caring about the future coming up. Those that may, you may think I would wipe out, somebody mentioned that earlier, as a king would wipe out all the other people, even the little ones. I'm going to provide for you and your little ones. I care about those as well. And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Is that got impact for us?
Yes.
Sure does, doesn't it?
Gives us assurance,
Mhm.
gives us comfort. Because I worry, I admit, I worry about the things to come.
Mm-hmm. Do you worry about maybe, like I have the things maybe I did in my past? Is God going to forgive me? Sometimes Satan will bring those things up and try to throw them up to dissuade you from following God, I think. And you realize, no, God's forgiven me for that.
Yep.
It's hard to accept. Even knowing these things, it's so hard to accept it for people.
I worry about grandkids and, what
Yeah.
is their future going to be.
Yes.
So, he reassured them and your little ones.
And your little ones.
Yep. I love that. Anybody got any comments or questions on that? Has something stood out to you in those? I know we don't have a lot of time, so we would have jumped to the next one, I guess. Let me see. There is a statement there that Joseph's response to his brothers in verses 19 through 20 summarize the entire message of the Joseph narrative. Do not be afraid, but trust in God, because he is faithful to accomplish his plans and purposes in the lives of his covenant people. That's what this person had wrote, not what Joseph said, perhaps. So the key concept here is what? God is in control, right? God is in control. That's what he's saying. You guys meant it for evil. God's purposes were good, even in that evil, right? So the key concept is God's control. Says Joseph wisely acknowledged that God had reversed his brother's plot for calamity. The basic idea of the Hebrew wording involves the use of the mind in the thinking process. The concept is not so much that of understanding as it is of creating of new ideas. The brothers concocted their plans in their own minds to do in Joseph, right? But God sovereignly overcame their mischief to fulfill his plans in his own mind. The two parts of Joseph's statement parallel one another. One heightens the contrast between a human's evil intentions and yet God's good purposes. This theme of the contrast between good and evil appears throughout Genesis. It makes its final appearance in Joseph's interpretation of his experiences.
Which you'll see another good, clear understanding of his experience in chapter 45,
Yep.
verses 5 through 8, where he gets equally clear.
Yes. Oh yeah, it's abundantly clear, right?
Mhm.
Let's look at the last point here, because we're getting short on time, and I hate that when that happens. But once they finally embraced Joseph's mercy and forgiveness, it says, his brothers and his families were able to settle peacefully in Egypt. But while Joseph was busy taking care of the present, he also had an eye to the future and God's ultimate fulfillment of his purposes. So in these last 5 verses, I want you to note what Joseph's last request was. We kind of talked about it already. Who has number 3?
I do.
Go ahead.
Joseph and his father's household remained in Egypt. Joseph lived 110 years. He saw Ephraim's son to the 3rd generation, and sons of, how do you say his name?
Manasseh?
Manasseh, thank you. And son Machir, good enough, huh? Were
Yes.
recognized by Joseph. Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will certainly come to your aid and bring you up from this land, the land he promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Joseph made the sons of Israel take an oath. When God comes to your aid, you are to carry my bones up from here. Joseph died at the age of 110. They embalmed him and placed him in a coffin in Egypt.
So it says that his brothers, sons of Israel, and he says to his brothers, probably those brothers that were still alive, because he was one of the youngest ones. Okay.
Yes.
So were all the brothers alive? Probably not, but there was representatives of those clans there at this thing. So he was speaking to the family also, the whole family, if you want to call it in that way. And he's got something specific he requests. What is that specific request that he had?
To take his body to Canaan with them.
With them. So in other words, what's going to happen? They're going to leave in the future.
Yeah.
They don't know when yet. But when that happens, I want you to take me with you. You know, isn't that an interesting picture? Instead of take me up there now, and like we did with Jacob, says, we're going to go back. Our family's going to go back. And when we do, I want you to take me with you. Wow. What a picture of that, isn't it? Of what he looks forward to the future in. He sees what's going to happen. God's given him probably a revelation, the fact that it's going to be a while, right? He's going to be there and until they come. Let's read now Exodus 13:19. I think, Steve, you've got that one. And also then Hebrews 11:22 after that.
Exodus 13:19. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him when they left Egypt.
This is like 400 years later, by the way.
For he had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely take care of you, and you shall carry my bones from here with you.
Okay, and then Hebrews 11:22.
By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the exodus of the sons of Israel and gave orders concerning his bones.
So the writer of Hebrews is saying this he's giving us a little insight of the Jews here. This was Joseph preparing them for the Exodus, is what he's basically saying there, right? And this was something that, like I said in the very beginning, they would have known. There's the bones of Joseph. He's going to go back with us. We're enslaved now because the Pharaoh came up later, right? Who didn't know Joseph, and they enslaved them, and they're starting to look forward to that fact that now we're going to go. When are we going to go? I don't know. We're waiting for that leader, and God was ready with Moses. You see, it was all part of this plan, right? So the key point here is people, because Ephraim and Manasseh was what? The future of Israel. It was representing the future of Israel. What did I do with that thing? I left it somewhere. Oh, here it is. We're almost out of time. Buzzer's going to buzz any moment here. Joseph's sons were born in Egypt. Each produced a tribe of Israel, giving Joseph's family a double portion of the land. So if you count them up, you realize, wait a minute, there's 13 tribes now, right? If you want to think of Manasseh and Ephraim as being what was once was Joseph is now Ephraim and Manasseh.
They're sometimes called the half tribes.
Yes, the half tribes also.
Because the two of them together
But
are the one.
Ephraim means, who is the younger one, means 2 pasture lands or 2 fruit land. He received precedence over his older brother when Jacob blessed him. Remember, he said, okay, here's Manasseh. Here's Manasseh on your right. Here's Ephraim over here. And Jacob took his hand and went, And then I think Joseph said, no, that's the wrong way. Yes, it is. It's the
You got
right
it
way.
mixed up, Dad. Nope, I'm good.
I'm right.
God said.
Yeah. So later it says Ephraim's descendants became the leading tribe in the northern kingdom. By the 8th century BC, Ephraim often served as an alternate name for the entire northern kingdom of Israel. It was kind of an alternate name for him. The name Manasseh, Joseph's older son, meant God has caused me to forget. Although Manasseh was the older son, he did not receive the blessing typically belonging to the firstborn son. But not always. We know that's not always true, right? In fact, Jacob resisted when Joseph tried to correct his father during the time of blessing. So, the buzzer rang. Who rang that buzzer?
Who could have done that?
400 years later, Moses comes on the scene. That man appointed by God to lead those people back. Wow. You think they knew about this coming up? You think they were looking for it? They were primed, weren't
Some
they?
of them.
Well, not all of them, yeah, we know that, but the faithful ones were.
Yep.
That presence of Joseph's coffin would have affected the future generations of Hebrews in Egypt profoundly. Joseph's narrative closes the book of Genesis, closes our study finally on this, in the story of the patriarchs. Times have changed since Joseph lived, but as believers we serve the same God, and we are called to faithfully remember His plans and purposes for His people. You got the new book, Rick? Forgot to give that one to David.
I'll take one up for.
Thank you very much.
Hand that down.
Let's sum it up here. 3 main points to sum it up here. Christians can accept forgiveness from others, right? Can we accept forgiveness from others? We should.
We should.
Yeah.
And we
It's
should
hard.
also forgive others as well. Second, those are hard things to do.
Yeah.
Christians can faithfully exhibit God's character in others. There was an interesting thing about that. I'm going to try to find it real quick when we get done here. But there's what's called a typology, and there's parallels between Joseph and Jesus that are really interesting. Anyway, to go on, the last point: Christians can assure others of God's eternal faithfulness to His people. There's many character traits we see of Joseph. What are some of the things you think Joseph exhibited, character trait-wise?
Spiritual faithfulness.
Faithfulness.
Yes.
Oh, that's a big one, isn't it? Yeah. How about leadership? How about the one that starts with F? Forgiveness. Yes. He also exhibited purity. He always worshiped God. He gave glory to God. Every single time he says, "Not me, Pharaoh.
Yeah.
It's God." You know. He would tell that to the cupbearer. He says, "Not me. It's God. It's going to give you that." I saw that.
I know.
Patience, he had patience too, and he had trust. Anyway, those are good traits for all of us to have. I was supposed to write on an archivist, so there they are. Think of them being right there. Our key verse is verse 20. I'm going to read it again. It says, "As for you, my brothers, you meant evil against me, but God wanted it for good, in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive." So Joseph always gave it to God. He always turned it to God, didn't he? That's something we can do in our own lives as well. Any comments or questions before we say our closing prayer? I hope you like these studies. I thought they were very, very good. I learned a lot of stuff that I did not know before, and it was one of those kind of things where you realize, oh, gee, I should have known this. Why did I know this? You know.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to read was the Bible skill thing is talking about typology. It says, Bible students have observed similarities between Joseph's life and Jesus' life. The practice of recognizing such similarities or parallels is called typology. This is under Bible skill. It's also in your book, I think, too. A type is a character, event, or institution that has a place or purpose in history. But by God's plan, it corresponds to a later character, event, or institution. Typology helps us to see God at work in all of history, Old Testament and New, and how it connects through, right? Although Joseph was not the unique son of God, he demonstrated some Christ-like characteristics. What were some of those characteristics? We just talked about them. Forgiveness, right? What did he do to his brothers? Totally forgave them. What did Christ do on the cross?
He
Totally forgave those who were killing him. Interesting, isn't it? Joseph was willing to forgive his brothers instead of exacting revenge. We see that Jesus said, "Forgive them, they don't know what they're doing." Another was both were stripped of their robes. Remember this, the robe of many colors was stripped away. When Jesus' robe was stripped away.
Yeah.
And although the suffering had different purposes, they both suffered. both knew God was at work in it, in their suffering. They did not see it as something that they could not handle because God was in control. Anyway, what other parallels do you suggest? Well, you could think about that because we're out of time. Let's have a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for all you've done for us. For the study in Genesis, Lord, we just thank you so much for how you revealed all these truths, these principles to us. Oh, Lord, thank you so much for all the blessings that you give us in our lives, Lord. Sometimes we don't see them until later. We realize later how you were taking us through a time of testing because you had something so much better for us, Lord. Help us to accept forgiveness also, to exhibit your character in all things, Lord, and to assure others of the faithfulness that we see, Lord, exhibited to you, to us. That we share that to others as well, so they can have that same thing in their lives as well, and they can accept Christ as Savior. Thank you in your Son's name, amen. Thank you for being with us today. We're not too late, 5 or 6 minutes. All right, but this is Grace Baptist Church. My name is Norm Ellis, Adult One Bible Study. Thank you for being with us online and here in the classroom as well. God bless you all, and stand by. Pastor Matthew is going to be bringing the message in the next little bit on this same YouTube channel, or upstairs if you're in here.
Thank you, Norm.
Thank you, guys. Great discussion. All right.
Oh, man, that's horrible. Tina,
Yes.
you hear about that accident on I-5 northbound last night?
No.